Welcome to the Straight from the Source's Mouth podcast. Frank talk about sex and dating.
All right. Hello and welcome to episode number 28 of season 2. My name is Tamara and you're listening to the Straight from the Source's Mouth podcast. Today's guest is Dr. B. We'll be talking about the male perspective of the female-led relationship, chastity, and some resources for you to learn more. And if you like the episode, be sure to tell your friends about it and rate it as well. Thanks for joining me today, Dr. B.
My pleasure.
All right. I usually just jump right in. So I know I had Krystine Kellogg on the episode who has a podcast, her own FLR, female-led relationship, and I heard her side of it. And she talked a little bit about her husband, but I think it'd be interesting to hear from the male perspective. So what do you want to say about like either how you got into it or what the dynamic is generally for the male side of it? Or the allure?
Sure. I got into it later in life. I started off as a male dominant in my teens and did that for most of my life. Had a submissive side as well, but never had the opportunity to exercise it. I had a very well-developed dominant side and grew weary of it over time. It has its benefits to both parties. I think BDSM in general, if done from a mental and emotional mindset, is beneficial to all. I've seen a lot of women get empowered by being in a female submissive situation. They get to work out their demons and their past traumas and whatnot, and grow into more dominant people in the world, actually. People in the BDSM scene are generally looking for balance. And so you'll find a lot of people that are very powerful in the world tend to be more submissive sexually and in private. So you'll find a lot of attorneys, judges, cops, politicians tend to go for the sub side. Now, they may only pay for that with a professional dominatrix, but everybody's looking for balance.
Yeah.
In terms of a female-led relationship, when I started reading about it more as a living dynamic, it had a great deal of appeal to not only my sub-side, but to the empowerment of women. This whole mindset of a male-dominated society, I don't know if you have any background in family study or anything of that nature. That was propagated out of the times when men were hunters and women stayed at home to care for the children, mainly because when woman was having her period, the animals could smell her and they could never capture or hunt anything. So they said, you stay home and we'll do the hunting. And that's how the male dominance in society started. There are female dominating lifestyles throughout the world. A lot of African tribes, a lot of the Black population is a matriarchal society. And for whatever reasons that might be. So it happens in various degrees. Women are the caregivers. When I would teach dominance as well at conventions and in private settings for people, and everyone has had a male and a female dominant. They're called your parents. And they basically controlled you verbally, sometimes physically, but always verbally. Teachers are dominant. The reason cops wear dark clothes and not white ice cream uniforms is because they're asserting their dominance. They wear sunglasses in times where no one would wear sunglasses, mainly so you can't see their eyes.
Yeah.
They're creating a wall of control. They won't engage with you in kind of chit chat or any of that sort of thing. They'll exercise their dominant nature to let you know that they're in charge and you're not. In terms of a female-led relationship, it made a whole lot more sense when you look at it from what the needs are for both parties. Women are much more emotionally oriented and nest builders, and men are much more, in general, sexually oriented. And that plays back into the animal basic instinct of men spreading their seed by virtue of testosterone. We're dominated by that. So men are looking to put their seed wherever they possibly can. And that goes back to the laws of nature, where women are nesters primarily and much more emotionally involved in a relationship, even sexually. To have sex with a man allows him to come into you. And there's much more of an emotional price to pay for having sex with somebody. Now, women can have casual sex, obviously, but for the most part, women are much more emotionally driven. So if women are more emotionally driven and men are more sexually driven, the better dynamic is for her to control him.
Yeah.
And
you're selling me on it.
yeah. So, and it's an easy sell for women once they think in terms of that paradigm. Mm-hmm. So if you rule what happens sexually, you own him. Yeah. And the quickest way to own a man is don't let him come. The more you can string him along that way, and the old saying is you're a cock tease. Yeah. There's power in that. You possess something that men do not have and men are programmed for. So take advantage of it. And if you pair that with conditioning or training, if you want to be more specific about it, you're going to get what you need. And then both parties will be happy because he will be in a perpetual state of arousal because of your control. And that's where chastity comes in. Chastity is a perpetual reminder, very physical and literal reminder of who's in control.
Yeah, and can you explain like what that is exactly? Because I know we did have an episode about it, but just the basics. So just to remind people,
chastity is either a plastic or silicone or metal device that the man wears over his genitals, and it locks so that he cannot remove it. Okay. She is in control. She is the key holder, and there are books on being a key holder and how you can play with it and tease and denial and that sort of thing. But you ultimately captivate him sexually, and he ends up being quite literally in a state of perpetual arousal. So it's twofold. It's obviously great denial. He has no control over his genitals. He cannot masturbate. She owns it. Go ahead.
I listened to your episode with Krystine, and there was quite a bit of talk about the different types, and I knew of the concept, but that's about it. So just like any of the basics. And I think you talked about the fit and the different things.
Right.
But, and it's meant to, like, I think you said you cannot get aroused when you're wearing it. Like it prevents the ability. And sometimes you even go longer. Or I know you said start slower. And then, but I'm sure and you mentioned books too. So if there's any books that come up or resources that help people understand.
They're all on Amazon too, by the way, not to do a plug for Amazon, but Amazon has quite a library of books to choose from. If somebody's interested in the lifestyle relationship, there's a great book by a woman named Georgia Ivy Green called How to Set Up a FLR, How to Set Up a Female-Led Relationship. That seems to be the most real how-to book. Mm-hmm. And she breaks it down into the various dynamics, because some dynamics are much more liberal in that there's a lot of equality. It never shows in public. It's a private thing. And it goes into, first mate and captain, or totalitarian dictator and slave, if you will, or completely owned. And the dynamic is negotiated between the two people. And she has a checklist in her book as to how much you want to agree or not agree on. But chastity for a male not only captivates him sexually, but plugs him so much more profoundly into her that it's really kind of indescribable how that happens.
Is it because he's dependent on her with the key, or just because he can't do anything sexually, physically? He has more mental and emotional.
Both. Yeah, both.
Okay.
Yeah, all the focus becomes directed at her. Everything else is inconsequential because he's in this constant state of arousal and a constant state of denial, and that combination is incredibly powerful.
Okay.
And yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, do you know how many people do this? I mean, obviously not many people probably talk about it and it's private, but is there like I don't know, do you happen to know any stats from it, or is it?
I have some studies on BDSM, not on female-led relationships. In the BDSM community, the psychological studies were that they found those people to be the most well-adjusted people over the general population. At another time, I could forward you those studies if you want to read them, and you could make those studies public to people because you can go online and download them.
Yeah, I was just curious because we did do an episode on BDSM, and they stressed, the communication and trust you have to do those kinds of things. And I would imagine the same with female-led and chastity.
Exactly. And actually, the trust is far more profound than what we call vanilla relationship, because you're laying your most deep secrets and desires and history to your partner. And there's people that have been married for decades that could never do that. That was just not permitted within the relationship.
Yeah.
So it opens things up in a very positive way if you take it in a positive direction. It's always by consent. It's never abuse. And it's the power of it is that complete exchange between the two people. It becomes so much more profound that it's really kind of indescribable. And the whole concept of BDSM is not male, female per se. It's power exchange. One person's giving up power and the other person is taking the power. And when I studied hypnotherapy, the first thing they taught us was, in order to gain control, you give it up. And people are like, well, wait a minute, I don't get that. Well, if you have to have control, you're not in control.
Yeah, because you're like seeking it, but you don't feel like you have it.
Right. Well, they'll have a mental breakdown. They'll turn into a 3-year-old if you take their control from them. If they're control freaks.
Yeah.
So that's something that they need to work on then, really. But I find that, like, again, it's a balance thing. So people that you would think are dominant privately are most likely submissive.
Yeah. I've talked to other women that, like, successful women, and that's very true. Like, because we're so in charge out in life, we'd rather not be in the bedroom. And I definitely fall into that camp as well.
Right.
So,
yeah,
but
if you're in control all the time, that's the last thing you want.
Yeah. But I do struggle with, saying what I want. And we've had a couple episodes about that. So I don't know so you're saying as a submissive, you would actually be able, or you're wanted to tell what you want, or is it all the guys, in the male-female dynamic? As
a submissive? Yeah. Well, if the dominance is good and they're coming from a mindset as opposed to an activity, they're going to seek you out. They're going to ferret where you need to go and how you need to go. I actually had a 200 plus questionnaire that I would find out what turned them on greatly, moderately, not at all, and start with that. And then as I got to know them, I would start to work what I call their buttons, their vulnerabilities, to work them through that gauntlet. And so I would have women that were on, like, FetLife or Alt or Collar Space. There's a lot of websites that are communities of this. And right up front, the woman would say, "What are you going to do with me or to me?" And I would say, I have no idea. I don't know anything about you. I would have professional dominatrixes come to me for sessions as submissives because they were looking for balance again.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's 100% of anything. It's just not possible. I've taught at conventions on the subject, and you have some guy say, "Oh no, I'm 100% dominant." You go, "Really? If a cop pulls up behind you and he's got his lights on and his siren, you're just going to keep going because you're dominant, right?" "Oh no, I'll stop." "Oh, so then you did submit." Every time you go to a physician and you get undressed and they're fully clothed, you're submitting. How they treat you is the deciding factor of do you feel comfortable or not.
I like the idea of balance. Like I didn't think of it that way, but that makes complete sense. And then, so to get back to the female-led part, like as a submissive, what is it like? What's day-to-day life like in that dynamic?
It depends on the degree of exchange. It could be just normal, everyday interactions. I think Krystine mentioned that in her podcast, that she's got some children in the house and her mother, I think. And so to the world, it's a vanilla, equal exchange relationship. Some people go all the way out, and the woman is complete master over the household, and anything and everything that happens, she controls finances, she controls everything. And that's negotiated. That's essentially what Georgia Ivy Green lays out in terms of the various dynamics of which category you fall into. And then in her questionnaire, how much is he willing to give up and how much does she want to take hold of? And it becomes negotiated.
Okay.
So
and then
it varies.
Yeah. So for you personally, is like, I know you talked about wearing the chastity, I don't even know what you call it, chastity stuff.
Device. It's a device.
Yeah, the device. Okay. And like, what do you, I mean, I know we talked about what it provides, but how do you handle it, or how do you go about it? How often do you wear it? How often,
It depends on, again, the dynamic of the relationship. Anybody that's starting to do it, I would say do it for a few hours only during the day. Make sure it fits well, make sure it's comfortable in the respect. It's a reminder regardless, but it should not cut, abrase, any of those sorts of things. I would definitely not recommend starting with it 24/7 because you could end up with a gangrenous appendage in the morning if circulation got cut off. So I don't recommend that from a physician's standpoint. There it's 24/7 ultimately when you work up to it, if that's what she wants. It's her choice, it's her control. And that's where I am, actually.
And what, or I guess you might not know why you like it, but you just like it now. Or I guess you said you were dominant before, so now you prefer the submissive side.
Right. I like it for a number of reasons. I like it because it connects me more deeply with her. I like it that she's completely open about her sexuality and her needs and her desires, her wants, and that's a turn on for me. A woman that expresses what she wants is very powerful to me. As I'm attracted to that power.
Yeah.
Some women are very nurturing. That's not it for me. My mate doesn't have any children, so she was never a nurturer in that way. She nurtures animals. She's an ex-veterinary technician.
Okay.
So she's got a gentle side to her as well. But it's there's a safety and a security in it. There's obviously continuous arousal. There's her power, reminder of her power continuously throughout the day. It extends in a lot of different directions. It's not just about the sex per se. So.
Yeah, I would imagine it brings you obviously closer if she controls the key, and then not that. And I think you and Krystine talked about, it's not like you're preventing someone from cheating. It's the opposite of that.
Right.
And if you want to say more about that, it's not like you don't trust someone, so you're not letting them get out.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it can be used for that. Any woman could do that. So that might be a perk for any woman that's want to get in that respect. No, it's the exact opposite. It becomes the ultimate devotion, if you will. It's the same thing as people wearing rings on their finger to say, I'm married. What's that about? That's a sign that I'm devoted to somebody else. That's a societal sign. Well, this is a more powerful private sign. The world doesn't know it. A lot of women will wear keys around their neck. I had a friend that just is discovering this world, and she just did a trip down to the U.S. Virgin Islands, and she saw a young girl with keys around her neck. She knew what that meant. Nobody else did, but she did. There's actually T-shirts. I'm a key holder. Various little clues, if you will, to somebody who's aware of it. It's kind of a secret society. It's the same thing as the Freemasons handshake or Harry Potter being a witch and not a muggle, if you will. They're out among society, but nobody knows it.
Yeah. And I assume, because I just did an episode on the lifestyle in general, a woman who had gone to different clubs and all the stuff that happened in all the rooms. And I almost feel like maybe I shouldn't have had the episode on just because, people do like to keep it secret. Or is it more, I don't know. I think more people might do it if they thought more people were doing it. Like everyone's, I don't know.
That's
I'm
true.
kind of torn on that whole thing.
The first, when I taught, the first thing people would say is, am I weird? Am I the only one? And when I started in my teens, it was my creative outlet sexually. I tried to figure out how many ways I could get a woman aroused, or a girlfriend in those days. And it wasn't until I went to school in New York City, to college, that I happened upon a couple of BDSM sex shops. And I'm like, wow, this is wild. I'm not the only one. I don't have to make all this stuff myself. It's a lifestyle. There's other people out there. And then you start to read and understand that there's literature that goes back in time about male and female dominance. Sadomasochism comes from two well-known authors, the Marquis de Sade, that's where Sado comes from, and Sakar, I think his name is Sakar Masak, wrote Venus in Furs as a male submissive. And the Masak is masochism, was the term ultimately. So that came from two books that were written a long time ago. Okay. It's not new. So it's a dynamic that it's a personal dynamic. It's what people gravitate to or don't gravitate to. Speaking more deeply on the psychology of it, there's a great book by an author named Elise Sutton called Female Domination. And she's written a series of books, but that would be the first one I would start with. She actually did it as a dissertation for psychology or psych class. I can't remember. And she got into the lifestyle that way. Her book is the most in-depth book on female dominance. She really delves into the submissive male psyche to get a good hook on what that animal looks like, if you will, and how to react and deal with it. If anybody wants to look on the flip side, male dominance, the best book is called The Loving Dominant by John Warren. And John Warren is actually a professor at one of the Boston universities. And I found that to be like the definitive book on male dominance, but really on dominance overall. It separates out a lot of myths and whatnot about it. It's not about the BDSM part is not essentially about pain. It's about sensation and stimulation. And again, in dominance and submission, it's about power exchange. There's another term that is used called tops and bottoms, and tops and bottoms are only engaged in the physicality. There's no mindset to it. And to me, the power is in the mind, the exchange. as the old saying, sex is between your ears, not your legs. This is so much more so.
Yeah.
So much
and I
more
used to
so.
think that was more for women, but I guess it sounds like it's both sides. Maybe some men aren't as aware of it, but
well, some men are essentially completely genital oriented. And if you want to break them of that, you got to exert some dominance. You've got to take control of that. And then you'll find that it empowers you. All of a sudden, it's like bleeding into other parts of your world. You're not letting people step on your toes. You are out there in the world speaking your mind and asserting yourself. Not overtly, but it takes you up a few notches in self-esteem and self-preservation.
Yeah, I could see that. I know Krystine mentioned that too, that she came from a small town and she never thought she would get into it. But when she did, she was confident in more areas of life too. So
it's unfortunate. In the earlier days of girls being brought up were taught to be submissive.
Yeah.
Go to college to find yourself a husband. It's like, no, go to college to get an education and make something of yourself.
Yeah.
So those rules have changed quite a bit. Society is moving more toward the openness. And it's also moved more toward BDSM. Madonna, I think it was in the 90s or the early 2000s, came out with a BDSM book and exposed it. And a lot of her music and her dress was BDSM themed, if you will. I've recently heard a few tracks from Katy Perry. She's got, if you listen to some of her lyrics, it's about what she's going to do to him tonight.
Okay.
And then more recently, not a great example, is the 50 Shades of Grey. The problem with 50 Shades of Grey is everybody in fiction tends to wander into there's something wrong in his past that made him that way. And that is the farthest thing from the truth. There are sometimes people that are exercising their demons that way. They had some past trauma. And those are the things you have to be mindful of if you're a dominant, is not to step in any landmines of somebody's past traumas. And so that 200 questionnaire thing I have, my last 4 questions are you on any meds that I need to know about? And have you had any past traumas that I need to know about? Because this is very powerful stuff when you get that far into it as well. It's very enlightening and very liberating, but you have to know how to handle or dance around anybody that may have had strong experiences in their past.
Yeah. All right. Well, I tend to keep this around 30 minutes. So if you have any closing comments, or, I know you covered a lot of stuff, but if there's anything you really want to just leave the listeners with, like a kind of a,
like I said, if they are interested in it, those are the books to read, to get a foundation of it. If they want to ask people questions, they probably should go on one of the websites where somebody might be open to it. I probably would think FetLife would be a good choice. There are organized gatherings called munches where people meet in public restaurants. I think Krystine mentioned that as well. And it's a safe environment. People don't come dressed in leather or any of that sort of thing. It's a place to meet and greet and get to know like-minded people, and to be able to pick somebody's brain and ask questions and get a feel for where you fit in to the whole scheme of things. If you fit into the scheme of things, it's always your choice.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, those are very good tips and things to know. And as always, I love that providing books and resources and input and ideas and opinions on all things to educate people on, in case they didn't know, and always now that they're like super excited about this and can go find the books they need. So thank you very much for being on the episode. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Yeah. Bottom line is, they're not weird. They're not out of the ordinary or in a perverse group. And if it works for you, then it works.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Great. All right. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed the episode, everyone. And if you liked it, be sure to rate or review it. and you have been listening to Straight from the Source's Mouth, Frank talk about sex and dating. Thank you, everyone.
Frank talk, sex and dating educates.